Being a sports star is one of those things that can very easily spiral out of control if you aren't prepared to handle it. Many players have come and gone from football altogether due to an inability to shoulder that kind of pressure, because as a wise man once said, anybody can get it, the hard part is keeping it. And while some NFL players aim to make headlines off the field as well as on it, Tyrann Mathieu's pro football career has been entirely based on flying under the radar. Because after getting into some trouble in college, Mathieu would have to fight and claw for a second chance to follow his dream, and how he would respond to that has quietly become one of the best journeys in the NFL today. So before we jump into the story, make sure you subscribe to this channel, because we cover a different player or topic in depth every single week just like this. So to begin, let's look back to before the Honey Badger ever became the Honey Badger. Tyrann Mathieu is a man built from adversity, so much so that any stage of his life can be taken by itself and be considered an inspiration. The first begins with him born in New Orleans, Louisiana, and turning to football early on as a path away from his difficult childhood. His mother wasn't present for most of his life, and his father was and still is serving a life sentence in prison. Growing up without a mother or father, football served as an avenue for Tyrann to channel his frustrations into strength, and it would open new doors for him as a result. Despite being only 5'9" and 160 pounds, he wasn't afraid of anything and left everything he had on the football field day in and day out, and one coach in particular started to take notice. After a successful high school career playing cornerback, Mathieu signed to play under Les Miles with the LSU Tigers. And once he arrived in Baton Rouge, it didn't take long for the college football world to notice the SEC's new standout on defense. He'd play in all 13 games for the Tigers in his true freshman season, and his breakout performance would come in the team's biggest moment in the Cotton Bowl against Texas A&M. He'd tally an insane stat line of 7 tackles with 2 forced fumbles, a fumble recovery, and an interception, all en route to being named Cotton Bowl MVP. With the reputation as a ball hawk, coming into the next season, he was all anybody talked about, and he'd give them a reason to keep talking, with more electrifying performances to kick the year off. This is right around the time that a certain video of an animal on the internet who was small, cocky, and wanted nothing more than to just kick your ass started making waves, and it was just too perfect of a fit to pass up. As a fearless player who didn't care how much bigger you were, Tyrann Mathieu was now the Honey Badger. He'd run into a brief one-game suspension for violating team drug policy, but it wasn't considered anything major at the time, because he continued to make big plays week after week, not just on defense, but as a return man. He'd start to build a Heisman campaign on the back of these awe-inspiring defensive stats, even drawing some comparison to Charles Woodson, the only other defensive player to ever win the Heisman Trophy. He wouldn't end up winning because it is the Heisman after all, but he'd receive the Bednarik Award for Best Defensive Player in the nation, and would end his sophomore season with a team-leading 77 tackles and 6 forced fumbles. Immediately following the conclusion of the season, Tyrann Mathieu would be rated as a near-guaranteed first-round pick in the next year's draft. But what he didn't realize was that everything that was bright about his future was about to be shut off in an instant.
Yeah, Joe, we're just now getting word that he has indeed been dismissed from his scholarship. It has been confirmed by LSU.
Tyrann Mathieu is no longer on our team, violated team policies.
On August 10th, 2012, Mathieu would be kicked off of LSU's football team for failing multiple drug tests. Les Miles would describe that moment as one of the toughest things he's ever had to do as a coach. And things would get worse before they got better too, as in October of that year, while his former teammates were playing for a top 10 LSU program, Tyrann Mathieu would be taken from his home in handcuffs, effectively eliminating the small shred of hope that remained for him to return and play for the Tigers the next year. At this point in his life, he desperately needed to hit the reset button, and he set his sights on changing the course of his life in declaring for the NFL draft the next year. Even though his use hadn't become a problem yet, he saw the path that he was taking, the same one that led his father into a life of turmoil and loss, so he became determined to flip the script. His former teammate and close friend Patrick Peterson served as a role model for Tyrann, inviting him to work out in South Florida to get him ready to market his ability to NFL teams. He locked himself away from any and all distractions, and left his reputation as the Honey Badger off to the side, so that he could look team GMs into the eyes day after day to explain why he deserved a second chance. Despite having a high first-round draft stock the year before, his projections had all but fallen through the floor to a late second or third-round pick. Teams just didn't want to take a risk on a player that had been off the field and in trouble with the law, so Mathieu had to sit and wait to find out who would take a shot on him. But with some persuasion from his mentor Patrick Peterson to the GM of the Arizona Cardinals, Tyrann Mathieu would be granted that second chance by being selected 69th overall in the 3rd round. Pretty soon, Tyrann Mathieu began making his mark on the team, playing incredibly well at slot corner and free safety, with his skill set and ferocity providing tons of versatility to the Cardinals' defensive play calling. An outstanding statistical rookie year would be brought to an end by injuries, a torn ACL and LCL, but his performances had earned him a spot as a first-team All-Pro at slot corner. The next year would prove to be a struggle though, with the injury holding Mathieu back for nearly the entire season, But when 2015 rolled around, he was frustrated and ready to fight back. He'd be all over the field all year long, aggressive, and able to morph into just about any player he needed to be for the Cards, guarding slot receivers, tight ends, playing up at the line, blitzing. It didn't matter, he was going to get his. Alongside great playmakers like Patrick Peterson and Calais Campbell, he was a Swiss Army knife, allowing their defense to be as creative as anybody else in the league, as you could never expect to see any one role in particular from Mathieu. His confidence and swagger rallied the Cardinals, and though he didn't take the reins from veteran leaders like Peterson in the locker room, he began forming a foundation of those skills through a dominant regular season run. But nearing the end of an all-pro year at safety, he'd be hit by yet another wave of adversity. In Week 15, after intercepting a pass from the Eagles' Sam Bradford, Mathieu landed awkwardly and ended up tearing his right ACL, the opposite knee from his first injury as a rookie. It was a devastating blow to a 12-2 playoff-bound Cardinals team, and Bruce Arians would speak to the media after the game with tears in his eyes over how proud he was of not just the Honey Badger, but of Tyrann Mathieu the man and all he'd overcome. This was yet another hurdle in his already difficult life, and after the Cards fell out of the playoffs, their front office made sure their star safety wasn't going anywhere, as they signed Mathieu to a 5-year, $62.5 million extension. The recovery from another ACL tear had proved to be even more challenging than before though, and after 2 seasons of solid but not superstar play, the Cardinals decided they wanted to restructure Mathieu's deal and have him take a pay cut. When he refused, the team cut him. The Honey Badger was going to have to move on from Arizona, and when he was looking for a new team to sign with, the money became less of a factor, as he wanted to make sure the team and community would be a good fit for him and his family. He'd find that spot, signing a 1-year deal with the Houston Texans team that had been loaded with talent on the defensive side of the ball, but was coming off of an incredible letdown of a season the year before. There was no doubt that as soon as Mathieu arrived, he was ready to make his impact. He set off to be a vocal leader for other younger players on the team, bringing contagious fire and motivation for improvement every single day. In Romeo Crennel's scheme, Mathieu would be given a more defined role at free safety, leaving him to allow the game to come to him rather than trying to be everywhere at once as he had been in Arizona. From this role, he focused on making the players around him better, able to give breakdowns of what they needed to do since he'd dominated at their respective positions before. He took it upon himself to become that mentor Patrick Peterson had been to him, hosting team dinners and meeting up one-on-one with younger guys to build their game. He was using his life story as motivation to aim at higher goals, and that leadership would pay off. As an anchor point for the Texans, Mathieu would play a huge role in turning their season around, spinning an 0-3 start on its head to finish the year 11-5, securing a home seed in the playoffs after finishing 4-12 the year prior. He would tie his career high in tackles and add 3 sacks and 2 interceptions, but those stats aren't what best represent Mathieu's on-the-field impact for Houston. It was the life he brought into that locker room, and the other teams that wanted that spark of leadership started to take notice. After the Texans season ended with a disappointing playoff loss, all eyes were now on where Tyrann Mathieu's next step would be. After revitalizing his career and being able to play 2 straight 16-game seasons, he was a hot commodity in a loaded free agent class, and with his leadership and versatility making him the top target on multiple teams' boards, he could sign pretty much anywhere he wanted. He'd officially completed his journey from rock bottom to become one of the most respected veterans in the entire league. And he's chosen to continue his career in yet another locker room that's desperate for that leadership he's provided, one where his presence could easily be the difference maker in finishing a Super Bowl run. Tyrann Mathieu just recently inked a deal with the Kansas City Chiefs, signing for 3 years in an attempt to create a defensive unit that'll give some help to Pat Mahomes on the other side of the ball. Since the Chiefs' defense has struggled to show any consistency, especially in the secondary, Tyrann Mathieu can again play any role the team needs him to, as even last year he moved around to 6 different positions, and that was a step down from how he was used in the Cardinals scheme. With Mathieu's versatility in run and pass coverage, it's hard to quantify just how big of an impact he'll have in a revamped Chiefs defense, but his presence may be the push the team needs to get to that next level. And with all that Tyrann Mathieu has overcome in his life and career thus far, you're not going to stop the Honey Badger from taking exactly what he wants.
Oh, yeah.